It's such a treat to be here talking about the future of work and of the global economy, and given that we have 15 minutes in which to do it, we have plenty of time. So a lot of times folks ask me, what's going on with automation, with robots, with jobs, and why is society kind of the way that it is? And I'm sure there's 1,000 different ways into this conversation, and I certainly have tried a lot of them. But I always end up returning to this quote, which is from the Wall Street Journal last year. It says, "Never before have companies tried so hard to employ so few people." And that's really what's happening in developed society. It's this. If you're wondering why things are the way they are, it's this. Really large companies are in this aggressive, Olympiad-style competition with each other to employ as few people as they possibly can. And lo, it is having massive consequences. Companies have a few tactics they can use to really avoid committing to people. They can use contingency work, which is the economics term for all different forms of contractless labor, at-will employment, temporary work, sometimes called freelance work, sometimes called day laborers. Those are all forms of contingent work. And contingent work is such a powerful phenomenon. In the United States alone, last year, 2 economists from Harvard and Princeton University tried to figure out how many workers are contingent workers in the United States. And they calculated that 94% of new employment growth in the past decade was contingent work. Pause on that for a second. 94% of new employment in the United States in the past 10 years is contingent work? That's absolutely staggering. And what's more staggering is that our Bureau of Labor Statistics has no way to measure this number. It just disappears into the job number that we use, because many of our methods for analyzing on a global level as well what's going on economically are positively Byzantine. There's also workplace fissure. That's a second tool that CEOs can use to avoid employing people. They can hire these third-party companies to deal with the hiring and firing and management of all of their people, which creates giant problems for labor laws, because all of our labor laws were created in a time that was pre-fissured workplace, that was pre-third-party employment, so we don't know how to deal with it. And then lastly, of course, there's good old-fashioned automation. There's using hardware and software to do the things that you used to have employees do. And so those are the tools that companies are using to employ less and less people, and they hate talking about it, so they don't. And that's how we get to charts like this one. And this is using the manufacturing vertical as an example, but it is a truism across most verticals, soon to be all. We see this very obvious kind of correlation here. A lot less people working in the manufacturing sector and a lot more robots. This rise of the robots, of course, is something we're all very interested in talking about. And it's natural to have a reaction to charts like this and think, oh my God, who could have ever predicted this crazy time that we're living in? And the answer is, if you know economics, absolutely everyone. Every great economist in history from the 1700s on predicted exactly this. In fact, they were screaming about it. And that is why when people ask me about the future of work, I always say the answer of the future of work is understanding the history of work and economic history and economic theory, because it all said that this was going to happen. We'll start a little bit at the beginning with Adam Smith, just for a quick second. 1776, he publishes an inquiry into the wealth of nations, which is probably about 800 pages too long. So it can be a tedious task to read, but it's well worth it. And Smith is probably most well known for creating the phrase, the invisible hand, right? And sort of free market people love to use the phrase, the invisible hand, to justify, anything crazy that they're doing, limited taxation, any other kinds of things. Well, the term is entirely miscast and misused, because when Smith invented it, he was actually talking about tariffs between countries, and he only uses it once in the entirety of Inquiry into Wealth of Nations. The word that he uses all the time in the text, regulation. But people hate talking about that. Smith was an Enlightenment thinker. Smith was someone who's extremely skeptical of what it was that would ultimately happen when we used to capitalize society to compete with specialized labor. So he would tour these factories, and he would see month on month, year on year, of these places that he would visit, people toiling away at their one little thing that they did. He writes a lot about this in Wealth of Nations. Their one part of making the pin at the pin factory, and they'd made this little widget that made straightening it easier, or they'd invented a new process, and he went, oh my God, this is what specialization is going to do. It's going to create these very myopic people that only focus fetishistically almost on this one little task, this one thing that they know how to do, instead of kind of looking to the broader world and thinking about it on a macro point of view or a philosophical point of view or a meaning point of view. They're just going to want to learn to do one thing with their lives and just that, and that's who they'll be. And he was right. His words on specialization were that it was dangerous, and he said at the end of his book that it would potentially render man as stupid and ignorant as it is possible for mankind to become. So next time you hear someone use the phrase invisible hand, correct them quickly. Karl Marx, 100 years followed in his legacy. A lot of Marxist ideas have to do with the prediction of some sort of automated kind of world existing, but his text Fragment on the Machines is kind of the best resource for looking at his thoughts on how human beings would ultimately relate to machinery. And he very clearly lays out this future wherein as machines subsume more and more and more of the manufacturing process, the human beings become these kind of glorified babysitters that sit by the side and watch, and in fact don't understand what the machines are doing and don't have the intelligence to correct it if something goes wrong. One wonders what Marx would think today of machine learning, which is exactly Fragment's prediction. It's software that can teach itself to do things better than human beings can. Smith and Marx would be absolutely unsurprised to see this chart, which of course is one of the most famous charts on the future of employment from Oxford Martin 2013, wherein we can see on this right-hand column over here, this chart garrulously predicts that 47% of all existing jobs will be non-existent by the year 2030. And we can see here all these different colors represent different verticals of industry. Every industry gets to lose a whole bunch of its people, pretty much. And the great thing that I will say about this chart, and I will say about automation is class blind. So automation right now is probably best known for taking away a lot of retail jobs and a lot of transportation, truck driver jobs. That's just a fraction of the story of what automation can do. It is very thirsty to take away a lot of lawyers' jobs, and is doing so quite effectively. It's taking away a lot of financier jobs, a lot of certain classes of stock analyst jobs. These are all things that computers can do better than people, and they will automate. And I'm personally very excited about that, because I think finally, when we start seeing some sort of decimation of some of the more white-collar and elitist and above all these kinds of things happening jobs, then we'll finally start having the conversations that we need to be having as societies, which is how do we take care of people in a world where manufacturing, production and distribution really don't need us so much, or don't need near as many of us. So again, to history and context, and you cannot think about the future of employment without thinking about the past. This is the inside of the Ford factory. It's overwhelming as it is now. It's a Where's Waldo situation if you're trying to find a human being in there. I don't see one. But the more interesting part about this is, what did Ford used to be? If you know that in its halcyon days, both General Motors and Ford employed about 1 million people, right, with good jobs that were lifelong jobs for the most part, with fair wages, and you see this, you can now kind of contextualize that. Another thing that we can do to contextualize how severe things have gotten is to look a little bit at market capitalization. So if we go back to 1964, the biggest company in the world by market cap is AT&T, and they employ over 800,000 people. The biggest company by market capitalization comparatively today is usually Apple, and they employ about 116,000 people. So if you're an economist, a futurist, and a historian, your question is, what about those other 900,000 people? And that's the question that we have to answer. This is Amazon. Amazon is a pantheon of an automated workforce company, right? I mean, this is the company that almost named itself relentless.com, and they still own that URL. It's terrible. But Amazon wants to be associated with all these automated things. These are their Kiva robots. It wants to be associated with drones. It wants to be associated with, instantaneous delivery before you even knew you wanted it, right? But Amazon is also finally being called out for what it actually is, which is a terrible employer. Amazon's warehouses are staffed with two things: Kiva robots, which you see here, and also over 70 years old and homeless workers, meaning They employ workers who are both homeless and over 70. They call this their camper force. It's fully Googleable. For some bizarre reason, they're actually proud of this fact. And the reason that they hire these older folks for jobs that many would deem are kind of young man's work, right? They involve a lot of lifting, they involve an extensive amount of walking, often about 15 miles a day, is because they get 2 tax benefits for it. They get 1 tax benefit if you're on food stamps and a 2nd tax benefit if you're over 70. So that is what automation has begat in one of its, if not its most extreme example, is Amazon.com being allowed to be terrible. And there is no reason that we need to have this be the status quo, right? I'm sure there's not many people in the audience who right in this instant really feel like logging on and buying something, knowing that the people that fulfilling the order, especially during the holiday season, are struggling physically to do so and living in trailer parks in the evening. Amazon does pay for your camper's water hookup fee, though, so very generous. There's a better way. And this isn't, I'm not saying that brandless is the greatest company that in the history of the world, though maybe it will become that, but brandless is a company that's emerged in the past year as a competitor to Amazon. And what they're saying is that we can still use automation, technology, and all these kinds of different things to build really powerful companies because automation comes with a ton of profitability and productivity built into it. And that's something investors and managers love. We don't have to deny ourselves our passion for automation, but we can soften it with making sure that our sourcing is ethical, that we're transparent about hiring and wage practices, that we offer benefits, and we can remove a lot of the silliness, which in Brandless's case, they believe that brands come at a much higher tax that can be removed, and sell it at a different rate. And so you get this. $3 goods that are devoid of some of the packaging and some of the hee-haw that comes with a lot of the goods you buy on Amazon. Amazon has their own version of this called Basics. You see something different. And Brandless isn't the only company that's out there looking to build more competitive models. There's Everlane competing in clothing. There's Warby Parker, glasses. There's Lemonade, which is looking to build a more sustainable model of insurance that uses a lot of automation and a lot of humanity at the same time. So there is a better way. So 3 thoughts for luxury travel before I depart. One of them is that the rise of automated work will also yield a partner trend of a rise in empathy work. So the reason that studying economics is absolutely fascinating is it's just people attempting to measure the value of things. And they're just doing the best that they can, and a lot of times they're getting it kind of wrong. Hence our own Bureau of Labor Statistics in the United States being unable to measure 94% of its new employment growth. It's just a mistake. It's human beings. A similar mistake to that would be empathy workers or people that have a high degree of emotional intelligence. I'm sure many of you have these kinds of employees where they just have a gift with people, and you can't quite put your finger around why. And we also lack a lot of nomenclature for describing those kinds of people as well. Say like, oh, she's great with people, but we're leaving a lot on the table when we say that. Well, David J. Deming at Harvard University is very interested in studying the value of empathy workers because he's already discovered that empathy workers inside companies today create a ton of profitability. And so the idea is, in the future, we'll be able to go and study empathy. Will we be able to get a master's degree in empathy work from Harvard University in 15 years? Will we be able to train our kids to emphasize their empathy skills on their resume if they have them? Empathy work will be big, and it will be especially big in the travel luxury industry because it will be so in demand, especially amid all that automation. Geez, we'll all be starved for it. The second, and this is its own talk, and there isn't time to go into it today, but blockchain equals accountability. It is primed for the luxury travel market, and I will say that American Express has already heavily invested their loyalty program in building a blockchain hyperledger for it because they see the opportunity. So it is well worth investigating. Having a way for all of your employees and all of your users to benefit every single time someone transacts within the confines of your company is a beautiful idea. It's a win-win-win idea, and there are all kinds of applications for it. And lastly, this is a quote that's been attributed to a few different executives, but the sum of it is the last great experience that someone had anywhere is their new expectation for everywhere. If you are the company that goes forth and figures out how to be a good company in an automated world and a company that values people in a universe that's currently overvaluing robots, everybody else will copy you. So go forth and be first, and don't be afraid of automation.